The little black girl hid beneath the old cargo lift, asking the biker why her mom never returned after last night. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a cold and dreary morning when the little girl ran toward the old cargo lift in the back of a rundown warehouse. Her breath came out in sharp bursts, visible in the chilly air, as she desperately sought shelter beneath the rusted metal platform. She had no shoes, her small feet battered from the cold pavement, her clothes torn from running through alleys. She clutched her little hands tightly around her chest, trying to stop the shivering. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear and confusion. Why did she never come back? She asked, her voice breaking. She looked up at the biker standing near the lift, his leather vest gleaming faintly under the dim light. The man had just finished checking the motorcycles parked nearby when he heard the cry. The biker turned slowly, his eyes scanning the area until they fell on the small girl hiding beneath the lift. There was something about her, something that made his heart clench in a way he hadn't felt in years. What happened? He asked, stepping closer, his voice gentle but firm. The girl wiped her eyes, trying to focus on the biker's face, though the tears blurred her vision. My mom. She didn't come home last night. She said she would, but she never did. I don't know where she is, she sobbed, her voice full of raw desperation. The biker knelt down in front of her, his worn boots heavy on the cold concrete as he made eye contact. Did something happen to her? He asked, his brow furrowed. The little girl's head shook slowly. I don't know. She went out with him. She said it was just for a little while. But she didn't come back. The biker's mind immediately began to piece things together. He had seen this before. The tired eyes of a child who had been left behind, the cold silence that followed a promise broken. This wasn't just a case of a woman out too late. This was something more, something dangerous. The biker stood up, looking toward the other members of the motorcycle club who were slowly gathering around. He could see the concern in their eyes, the same concern he felt in his gut. Get ready, he barked to his crew. We have to find her. We're not leaving until we know what happened to this little girl's mom. The girl, still sitting beneath the lift, looked up at the biker, her small face full of hope. You'll find her? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. The biker nodded, his expression hardening. We'll find her, and we'll make sure she's safe. With that, the biker turned, signaling the others to follow him as they prepared to go on a search that would take them into the dark heart of a dangerous situation. Little did they know, the journey ahead would not only change the fate of the girl's mother, but also force them to confront the kind of danger they hadn't seen in years. And this time, they were determined to make sure they didn't leave anyone behind. Together, the bikers rode in silence, their engines cutting through the early morning fog as they followed the girl's lead. The sky above was painted in shades of gray, heavy with the promise of rain. The chill in the air seemed to deepen as the miles stretched out beneath them, the road ahead a blur of concrete and asphalt. The girl, still clutching the biker's jacket, pointed down a narrow street, her voice barely audible over the hum of the motorcycles. This way, she said, her voice shaking. This is where she went. The biker nodded, signaling to his crew. They slowed, the sound of the engines softening to a low purr as they turned onto the road she had pointed to. The buildings on either side were run down, their windows boarded up and doors chained shut. The area had clearly seen better days. As they passed an old gas station, the girl's face tightened. That's where she said she'd meet him, she whispered. The biker's eyes narrowed as he took in the rundown area. Something felt wrong. We're close, he muttered more to himself than to anyone else. He glanced back at his crew, signaling for them to be ready. They were a well-oiled machine, each biker knowing their role without needing to speak. They had been through worse before, but this felt different. The girl's urgency was contagious, and they could all sense the danger. As they approached the alley behind the gas station, the girl pointed to an old building at the far end. There, she said. That's where she went with him. She told me to wait here. The biker pulled up to the alley entrance, the rest of the crew following suit. They all dismounted in unison, the the sounds of the engines fading into the background as the group gathered around the girl. "Stay here," the biker instructed, his voice low and steady. He didn't want to scare her, but the tension was palpable. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear, and watched as they made their way toward the building. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and decay. As they approached the door, it creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. A flicker of movement in the shadows caught their attention. The lead biker motioned for the others to stay quiet, signaling for them to move in. They were close now. Each step felt heavier, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. The sound of footsteps echoed through the narrow corridor, reverberating off the walls. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "What do you think you're doing here?" The biker's hand instinctively went to the handle of his motorcycle, ready for whatever came next. Out of the shadows stepped a man, his face hidden beneath the brim of his baseball cap. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the look of someone who didn't take kindly to strangers. "We're looking for a woman," the biker said, his voice firm but calm. "Her name is Mia. She's been gone since last night. We need to know where she is." The man sneered. "You won't find her here. She's long gone." The biker's patience was wearing thin. "You're lying. We know she was here." The man took a step closer, his posture aggressive. "You're not welcome here. Leave now, and I won't make this more difficult for you." The biker stared him down, sizing him up. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. "Tell us where she is," the biker repeated, his voice colder now. "I'm not asking." The man grinned, a dark glint in his eyes. "You really think you can just waltz in here and take what you want?" he taunted. But before he could say anything else, a loud crash came from behind them. The bikers turned in unison, their hands instinctively reaching for the weapons they carried. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the distance, followed by a voice shouting, "Get out of here!" The man who had confronted them froze, his eyes wide with realization. "It's him," the biker muttered, recognizing the voice. The man turned, looking terrified, before he sprinted into the darkness. The bikers moved quickly, following the sound of footsteps until they reached the back door. There, in the dim light, stood a man, his face twisted in a scowl. "I told you to leave," he growled. The lead biker took a step forward, his fists clenched. "We're not leaving until we know where Mia is." The man raised an eyebrow. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you're not getting anything from me." The tension between them was palpable, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the streetlights overhead. But the biker knew they couldn't back down now. They had to find Mia, and they wouldn't stop until they did. The tension in the air was thick, every movement precise as the bikers stood face to face with the man who had just warned them to leave. His stance was aggressive, and the sharp glint in his eyes told them that he was not to be underestimated. The lead biker stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "We're not leaving without answers," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the silence. The man shifted, clearly calculating his next move, his eyes flicking between the bikers and the dark alley behind him. The air seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. "You want answers, huh?" The man chuckled darkly, his voice laced with sarcasm. "You think I'm just going to hand over some girl like she's a prize you can claim?" The biker didn't flinch. "You know exactly what we're talking about," he said. "Mia, where is she?" The man remained silent for a moment, as if weighing his options. He glanced toward the shadows, where another figure seemed to appear out of nowhere. It was another man, taller and broader, wearing a long leather coat and a scowl that matched the first man's. The two locked eyes for a brief moment before the new figure stepped forward, his voice low but full of menace. "I think you should leave now, before things get ugly." The bikers, unfazed, glanced at each other. They had been in tight situations before, but this one felt different. The lead biker nodded subtly to his crew, signaling them to keep their guard up. The last thing they needed was to escalate this into something they couldn't control. The first man, who had been speaking before, stepped forward again, his face twisting into a sneer. "You really think you can just barge in here, make threats, and get away with it? You're in my territory now." The bikers didn't budge. "We're not here to fight you," the lead biker said, his voice steady but firm. "We're here to find Mia. We're not leaving until we know she's okay." The air grew colder, and the silence stretched out, making every second feel like an eternity. The man finally let out a long, exasperated sigh. "Fine," he muttered. "You want to know where she is? I'll tell you." but you're not going to like it. The bikers exchanged glances, knowing they were finally getting somewhere, but wary of what would come next. The man continued, his voice low and threatening. She's been moved. You think she was just staying here? No. Mia's gone. And the people who took her? They don't care about what you want or what you think you deserve. The biker's expressions hardened. Who took her? The lead biker demanded, his patience wearing thin. The man stepped back, holding his hands up in mock surrender. You don't need to know, he said, his tone dripping with disdain. Just know this. She's gone, and you're wasting your time. No, the lead biker said, his voice now cold and sharp. We're not wasting time. We're going to find her, and we're going to make sure she's safe. And if you're in the way, we'll deal with you too. There was a long pause as the two men locked eyes, the air crackling with the intensity of the standoff. Then, without warning, the first man turned and made a swift motion to the side, revealing a door that had been hidden in the shadows. She's in there, he said, his voice suddenly devoid of its earlier aggression. But I wouldn't go in if I were you. You're not prepared for what's waiting. The bikers hesitated for a moment, but the girl's face flashed in their minds. They couldn't leave without her. The lead biker nodded to his crew, and with one final glance at the two men, he pushed open the door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and neglect. The room was dimly lit, with barely enough light to see the shadows that clung to the corners. As they stepped inside, their eyes adjusted to the gloom, revealing a small, cluttered room filled with old furniture and boxes. At the far end, a figure was huddled on the floor, her back turned to them. It was Mia. She was sitting there, trembling, her body curled into a tight ball, as if trying to shield herself from the world. The lead biker stepped forward, his voice softer now. Mia, he said gently, his voice breaking the silence. She slowly turned around, her eyes wide with fear. The moment she saw the biker, her face softened, relief flooding her features. You found me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The biker knelt beside her, his hand reaching out to gently touch her shoulder. You're safe now, he reassured her. We're taking you home. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, snapping the bikers back to the present. They knew they had no time to waste. They had to get Mia out of there, and fast. The lead biker looked over his shoulder, signaling to his crew to prepare for the next move. As they made their way toward the door, they knew they were just beginning to unravel a much bigger and darker story than they had anticipated. The bikers quickly ushered Mia out of the small, dark room, their eyes darting around as they listened for any signs of movement. The faint sound of footsteps echoing down the narrow hallway kept them on edge. They had no time to lose. The lead biker motioned for the others to follow him as they made their way toward the back exit. Mia clutched onto his jacket, her small frame trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. The moment she saw the bikers, she felt a surge of hope, something she hadn't felt in what felt like forever. She had been trapped in that place for far too long, and now she was finally getting out. Stay close, the lead biker said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. The rest of the crew followed in a tight formation, their eyes scanning every corner of the building as they moved swiftly toward the exit. They knew they were not alone. Someone had to be watching them, and they had to get Mia to safety before anything else went wrong. As they reached the back door, the lead biker hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the handle. His instincts told him something wasn't right. They had been too easy getting in, and now it felt like the trap was about to snap shut. He motioned for everyone to hold their positions as he carefully cracked open the door. The dim light of the alley outside greeted them, but there was no sign of any immediate danger. Yet, the tension in the air remained thick. Keep moving, the lead biker ordered, stepping out into the alley. He turned to Mia, offering her a reassuring smile. You're safe now, Mia. We're almost there. The crew followed, moving quickly but cautiously, their eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Every creak of metal, every rustling of leaves made their senses spike. They were on high alert. Suddenly, a voice broke through the silence. Hey, stop right there. The bikers froze, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. From the shadows, two figures emerged, each wearing dark clothes and masks, their bodies built like walls of muscle. The lead biker's hand went to the grip of his weapon, but he stopped himself. He wasn't about to start a shootout in the middle of the alley. Who are you? One of the masked men growled. What do you want with her? The lead biker didn't hesitate. We're taking her home, he said, his voice firm. She's been through enough. She's not going anywhere with you. The men looked at each other for a split second, and in that moment, the tension grew unbearable. It felt like everything was about to erupt. But then, just as quickly as the confrontation began, the masked men took a step back. This isn't over, one of them muttered, his voice low and threatening. We'll be watching you. With that, they retreated into the shadows, disappearing just as quickly as they had come. The bikers didn't waste any time. Let's go now. The lead biker barked, his voice urgent. They didn't know who those men were, but they knew they couldn't afford to take any chances. They had to get Mia to safety, and fast. They mounted their motorcycles, and the sound of the engines roared to life, the bikes kicking up dirt as they sped away from the alley. Mia held on tightly to the lead biker, her arms wrapped around him as the wind whipped through her hair. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was truly safe. As they rode, the lead biker couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. The sound of motorcycles in the distance was too consistent, too calculated. He glanced over his shoulder, but the road was clear. It didn't make sense. The crew kept pushing forward, their eyes constantly scanning for danger. They needed to get out of the city, far away from whatever forces were still chasing them. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the outskirts of town. The buildings became fewer, and the open fields stretched out before them, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. They had made it. For now, the lead biker pulled into a secluded area and stopped, signaling for the others to follow. The rest of the crew pulled in behind him, their engines dying down as they came to a halt. Mia slipped off the bike, her legs shaky but steady as she took a deep breath of the fresh air. She felt like she had just stepped into a new world. You're safe now, Mia, the lead biker said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. We'll stay here for the night and figure out our next move. But you're not alone anymore. We'll protect you. Mia looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The bikers set up camp for the night, the flickering light of the fire casting long shadows across the ground. As they sat around the fire, the weight of everything that had happened started to sink in. They had gotten Mia out, but there was still so much left to uncover. The lead biker knew that this was far from over. The people who had taken Mia were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But for now, they had a moment of peace. And that was enough. At least for tonight. As the night air grew colder, the crackling fire flickered in the distance, casting long shadows across the small camp the bikers had set up on the outskirts of town. Mia sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the flames. Her mind raced, haunted by the events of the past few days. She was safe now, yes, but the fear still gripped her chest, a constant reminder of what she had just escaped. The bikers, who had become her protectors, sat in silence, their faces lit by the orange glow of the fire. They were exhausted, but their eyes remained alert, scanning the area around them. The lead biker, whose name was Jack, stood up and walked over to Mia. He had been watching her closely since they had left the city. She was young, too young to be caught up in something like this. But now, she was with them, and they weren't going to let anything happen to her. He knelt down beside her, his large frame casting a shadow over her small form. How are you holding up? He asked softly, his voice steady and calm. Mia looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. She hadn't said much since they had left the building. I don't know, she whispered. I'm scared. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to him. Jack's heart clenched at her words. He could see the pain and fear in her eyes, the fear of returning to a place that had stolen her peace, stolen her childhood. You don't have to go back, he said gently. You're with us now. We'll keep you safe, I promise. Mia nodded but didn't say anything. She was trying to believe him, trying to trust these people who had shown up out of nowhere, but the terror of what had happened was too fresh in her mind. Jack stood up and turned to the others. They had been quiet for a while, but now it was time to talk. We need to make a plan, he said, his voice carrying across the camp. We've got one job right now, and that's keeping Mia safe. But we can't keep her here forever. We need to move out of here, get her to a place where she can be protected. The other bikers nodded in agreement. But we can't just leave. One of them, a woman named Sarah, spoke up. Those men, they'll come after her. We can't let them track us down. Jack ran a hand through his hair, thinking, we can't keep running. We need to find a place where we can hide, where Mia can get the help she needs. There was a long pause as the group considered their options. They had been through a lot together, seen the worst of what the world had to offer. But this situation was different. It wasn't just about protecting their own. It was about saving a child from a fate worse than anything they could imagine. Finally, one of the bikers, a man named Tommy, spoke up. There's a cabin, out in the mountains, he said. It's remote. No one will find us there. Jack nodded. That's where we'll go then. We'll head there first thing in the morning. The rest of the group agreed. They packed up their things, preparing for the long ride ahead. The fire burned low, the warmth from the flames beginning to fade, but there was a sense of purpose in the air now. They weren't just a group of bikers anymore. They were a team, united by a single mission. As they mounted their bikes, Jack glanced at Mia, who was still sitting by the fire, her face blank and distant. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The sound of engines revving filled the night air, and the group set off, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they rode toward the unknown. Mia sat in the back of Jack's bike, her hands clutching his jacket as they sped down the highway, the wind rushing past them. The night was quiet, the only sound the hum of the engines and the occasional distant howl of a wolf in the woods. As they rode, Mia couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. She wasn't alone anymore. She had people who cared about her, people who would protect her, and that was something she hadn't felt in a long time. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the dark highway winding before them like an endless ribbon. They were headed toward the mountains, toward the cabin Tommy had mentioned, but they knew the danger was far from over. They had to keep moving. They couldn't afford to stop. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a pale glow over the land. The bikers pushed on, their journey far from over, but in that moment, they knew they were doing the right thing. They were protecting someone who had no one left, and they wouldn't stop until she was safe. They would fight for her, no matter the cost. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft orange glow over the mountains as the bikers made their way through the winding roads. The air was crisp, the scent of pine and fresh earth lingering in the breeze. Mia, still gripping Jack's jacket tightly, felt the cool wind rush past her as they rode, her heart still racing from the fear she had left behind. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this way, free, but still uncertain. Jack kept his eyes focused ahead, his mind racing. The cabin Tommy had mentioned was still a few hours away, but they needed to stay ahead of the people who had been after Mia. He knew that no matter how far they ran, the danger would always be lurking behind them. The group had been riding in silence for the most part, each of them lost in their thoughts, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. The road was clear for now, but he knew that could change in an instant. He glanced back at the others, ensuring that everyone was still in formation. Sarah was at the rear, her sharp eyes scanning the road, while Tommy, Bear, and the rest of the crew kept close behind. Stay alert, Jack muttered to himself, more as a reminder than a warning. They were close. So close. But Mia's safety was still uncertain, and until they reached the cabin, he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Mia, on the other hand, was lost in the sound of the engines, the rhythmic roar of the bikes, almost hypnotic. It had been a while since she had experienced anything like this, something other than fear. The bikers, for all their rough edges, had been kind to her. She had never expected to find people who would fight for her the way they were. They were all strangers, but in the midst of this chaos, they had become her family, her protectors. Still, the thoughts of what had happened to her mother lingered in the back of her mind. She couldn't shake the image of her mother's face, so full of fear, before she had been taken away. Mia tried to push the thought aside, but it kept creeping back. The bikers had promised to keep her safe, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would succeed. Jack felt Mia's grip tighten as they rounded another sharp turn. He glanced back at her, offering a quick, reassuring smile. "We're almost there, Mia," he said, his voice carrying over the roar of the engine. "Just hold on a little longer." Mia nodded silently, though the worry still clouded her eyes. The ride seemed to stretch on forever, and Jack knew they needed to stop soon. They needed rest, and Mia needed to feel safe, to let her guard down, at least for a while. The group continued to ride in a loose formation, the sound of their engines echoing through the quiet woods. The sun had fully risen by now, bathing the landscape in bright light. They had made good time, but Jack knew that their respite would be brief. They had to keep moving. As they approached a small clearing, Jack raised his hand, signaling for the group to pull over. They slowed, rolling into a secluded area surrounded by thick trees. It was the perfect spot to stop, but Jack was immediately on edge. He scanned the surroundings carefully, making sure they weren't being followed. When he saw that the coast was clear, he signaled for everyone to dismount. The bikers spread out, setting up camp quickly. Bear and Tommy moved to the edge of the clearing, keeping watch, while Sarah checked the perimeter for any signs of movement. Jack approached Mia, who had stepped off the bike and was now standing beside him, her eyes still distant. "You okay?" he asked gently. Mia nodded, but Jack could tell she wasn't. He could see the fear still lingering in her eyes, even if she tried to hide it. "It's going to be okay," Jack said, his voice soft but firm. "We'll stay here for a while. You can rest." Mia hesitated for a moment, then slowly sat down on the ground. She looked up at Jack, her face pale and drawn. "What if they find us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack sat beside her, leaning back against a tree. "They will keep looking," he said, his voice steady. "But we'll be ready for them. We won't let them take you again." Mia's eyes searched his face, as if looking for any hint of doubt. But there was none. Jack was telling the truth. They would fight to protect her. The group settled into a quiet routine, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at him. He had known danger before, had lived through worse, but this was different. This time, they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to protect someone who had been hurt in ways that no one should ever have to endure. And as much as he wanted to believe that Mia was safe now, he knew the real battle was just beginning. They couldn't stop running. Not yet. As the evening drew near, the sound of their voices carried through the camp, mixing with the crackling of the fire. Jack kept his eyes on the trees, waiting for any signs of danger. For now, they were safe, but the war was far from over. The bikers would do whatever it took to make sure Mia never had to face that nightmare again. And they wouldn't stop until they had secured her future, no matter the cost. The night was growing colder, and the quiet of the woods was only interrupted by the occasional crack of branches in the distance. Jack stood watch at the edge of the camp, his eyes scanning the darkened tree line. His instincts were on high alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like they were being watched. The rest of the crew had settled in for the night, but Jack knew they couldn't afford to relax. Mia was sitting by the fire, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. She looked calm, but Jack could tell that the trauma of the past few days still weighed heavily on her. He walked over to her slowly, crouching down to meet her gaze. "You okay?" he asked softly. Mia nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Yeah, just tired," she whispered. Jack could hear the exhaustion in her voice, but he knew there was more to it than that. She was still haunted by the fear of what had happened, by the uncertainty of what was to come. "I'm not going anywhere," Jack said, his voice steady. "You're safe here. We'll stay until we know it's safe to move again." Mia's lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice small. Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "We're family now." As he stood up to check on the rest of the group, a distant rumble of thunder echoed in the sky. The storm they had been anticipating was finally rolling in. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees, and the temperature dropped even further. Jack's gaze shifted toward the sky, the dark clouds swirling overhead. They needed to move. "Everyone gather up," Jack called out, his voice carrying through the camp. "We're heading out. Now." The bikers quickly packed up their things, the urgency in their movements clear. They had to keep moving, and with the storm approaching, it was their only chance to make it to the cabin Tommy had mentioned. Jack walked back to Mia, who was now standing up, her face tense with worry. "We're leaving now," Jack told her. "Get your things, we'll ride out in 5. Mia nodded and gathered the small bundle of belongings she had kept close to her. As she walked toward Jack, she hesitated for a moment, looking back at the campfire. "What if they find us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack paused, his eyes softening as he met her gaze. "They might try," he said, his tone serious. but we're not going to make it easy for them. We'll do whatever it takes to protect you, Mia. I promise. She looked up at him, her expression vulnerable, but there was something in her eyes now, a spark of hope. I believe you, she whispered. The group mounted their bikes, and the sound of their engines roared to life once again, filling the air with a sense of purpose. The storm had begun to spit rain, the first drops hitting the ground like tiny beads of ice. Jack led the way, with Mia riding behind him. The others followed close behind, their headlights cutting through the now darkened forest. The road was slippery, the rain quickly turning the dirt paths into a muddy mess. As they rode, Jack kept glancing back to check on Mia. She was clinging to him tightly, her small hands wrapped around his waist. He could feel her shivering, but there was something else there, something that made him believe she was starting to trust them. The group rode for hours, the rain pouring down harder with every passing minute. The sound of the motorcycles cutting through the storm was the only thing that could be heard above the howling wind. Jack knew they had to reach the cabin soon, or they'd risk being trapped in the storm. The darkness was thick, but the headlights from their bikes kept them on track, illuminating the way through the trees. Then, just as Jack thought they might be lost, he saw it. The cabin. It stood out in the distance, a small silhouette against the backdrop of the stormy sky. Jack pushed his bike harder, urging the others to follow. As they reached the cabin, the bikers quickly dismounted, moving inside to find shelter from the storm. The moment Mia stepped inside, she let out a relieved sigh, feeling the warmth of the fire that had been started in the cabin's hearth. The room was small, but it was enough. They had made it. This is it, Jack said, looking around at the others. We'll stay here until we know what our next move is. The crew settled in, the storm raging outside as they sat around the fire, their wet clothes steaming in the heat. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't completely safe yet. The people who had taken Mia were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to find her. But for now, they had shelter, and for Mia, that was enough. As the night wore on, Jack kept watch, listening for any signs of movement in the woods. The wind howled outside, but inside the cabin, there was a sense of calm, of temporary peace. Mia, sitting by the fire, looked up at Jack and offered him a small smile. Thank you, she said again, her voice full of gratitude. Jack smiled back, his gaze warm but serious. We're not done yet, Mia, but we'll get through this. Together. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, the bikers knew they were safe, for now. The storm outside had calmed, but the heavy air inside the cabin still felt thick with tension. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, providing the only warmth in the small, dimly lit room. Jack sat near the door, his eyes scanning the darkened woods through the cabin's small window. The rest of the group sat around the fire, their soaked clothes now drying in the heat. Mia was curled up in a corner, wrapped in a blanket, her small body trembling despite the warmth of the room. Jack could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The trauma of the last few days had taken its toll, but there was a flicker of something else there too. Hope. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. Jack wanted to believe it was real, that they had made it to safety. But deep down, he knew they weren't out of danger yet. The people who had taken Mia were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. His hand instinctively went to his jacket pocket, where the phone sat. He hadn't checked it in hours, but he knew that the longer they stayed in one place, the more vulnerable they became. He pulled it out and checked the screen. No messages, no calls. It was silent, just like the woods around them. He let out a sigh, tucking the phone back into his pocket. We need a plan, Jack said, breaking the silence. The rest of the crew turned their attention to him, their faces serious. We can't stay here forever. We need to keep moving, find a more permanent safe house. Tommy, who had been sitting by the fire, nodded. I agree, he said. We can't risk getting trapped here. But we need to be careful. If they've already found us once, they'll find us again. Jack rubbed his face, feeling the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. We won't let them take her again, he said, his voice low and firm. But we can't afford to make any more mistakes. We need to get Mia somewhere safe, where they can't reach her. Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. We need to contact someone who can help us, someone who has resources, someone who knows how to handle this. Jack turned to her, his brow furrowing. Who do you suggest? Sarah looked at the rest of the group before answering. There's someone I know, she said cautiously. Someone from my past. He's got connections, people who can help us disappear for good. Jack studied her carefully. He trusted Sarah, but he knew that getting involved with the wrong people could complicate things even more. Who is he? He asked, his tone guarded. Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering. His name is Marcus. He used to run with a group in the city, very different from us, but he knows how to cover his tracks. If we can get to him, he can get us out of here. Jack considered her words. It was risky, but they didn't have many options. Mia was still in danger, and every moment they spent in the cabin brought them closer to being discovered. All right, Jack said after a long pause. We'll head to Marcus. But we need to move fast. We can't let anyone trace us. The rest of the crew nodded in agreement. They were all in this together now, bound by a common purpose, to protect Mia, no matter the cost. I'll get my things, Sarah said, standing up. We'll leave first thing in the morning. The group quickly made plans for the next day, each person taking turns keeping watch as the others tried to rest. Mia had finally fallen asleep by the fire, her face peaceful for the first time in what seemed like forever. Jack couldn't help but glance at her every few minutes, making sure she was safe. As the hours passed, the fire slowly died down, and the cabin grew colder. Jack wrapped his coat tighter around himself, his eyes still on Mia. He knew they couldn't afford to stop now, not when they were so close to getting her out of this nightmare. The night passed in silence, each biker lost in their own thoughts, but Jack remained vigilant, his mind constantly working through the plan ahead. At first light, they would leave the cabin and head to Marcus. Jack knew that finding him would be their best chance at getting Mia to safety. He just hoped they weren't too late. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, the group gathered their belongings and prepared to leave. Mia woke up groggily, rubbing her eyes as she stood. She still looked tired, but the spark of hope in her eyes was a little brighter. She was ready to leave the cabin, to start over, to escape. Jack helped her onto his bike, giving her a reassuring smile. We'll get you out of here, he promised. As the group revved their engines and started down the road, the storm clouds had finally passed, leaving the sky clear. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were together, and that was all that mattered. They would fight for Mia's safety, no matter what it took. The morning was cold, with the sun just starting to rise above the distant hills, casting a pale light across the narrow, winding roads. The bikers moved in formation, their engines humming as they cut through the crisp air. Jack led the way, with Mia riding behind him. She was quieter now, more withdrawn, but Jack could sense the relief in her as they headed toward their next destination. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the cabin, each of them lost in their thoughts, but Jack knew that this next step was crucial. They had to get to Marcus, but he also knew that the people who had been chasing Mia weren't far behind. Every mile felt like a countdown, and they couldn't afford to waste any more time. Stay sharp, Jack said, glancing back at the others. We can't afford to slip up now. Keep your eyes open. The others nodded, their faces serious as they rode on. The landscape around them was still thick with trees, the road winding through them like a snake. It felt like they were the only ones on the road, but Jack knew better. They were being followed. He could feel it in his gut. Mia was still holding on to him tightly, her hands gripping his jacket as if she were afraid to let go. Jack's heart went out to her. She was just a child, yet she had already been through more than anyone should ever have to endure. But they were close now. Marcus was their best shot at getting her to safety. We'll make it, Jack whispered under his breath. He had to believe that. He had to. Hours passed, and the rain started to pick up again. The dark clouds had returned, and soon, the bikers found themselves riding through a downpour. The wind howled through the trees, and the roads became slick and dangerous. Jack pushed his bike harder, trying to cut through the storm. The others followed, keeping close, but Jack could feel the tension rising. He glanced at the sky, knowing that Marcus Place was still a few miles ahead, but the storm was only going to make things harder. He knew they had to push through. They couldn't stop now. Mia was still holding on to him, her face pressed against his back as the rain soaked through their clothes. Jack could feel her trembling, but she didn't say anything. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her that everything was going to be fine, but the truth was, he didn't know. They hadn't made it to Marcus yet, and the danger was still out there, closing in with every passing second. As they neared a sharp bend in the road, Jack's bike skidded slightly on the slick surface. He corrected it quickly, but the movement caught the attention of the others. They slowed down, making sure they were still in sync. "We've got to be close," Jack muttered, scanning the area. The storm was only getting worse, and the visibility was poor. He could barely make out the shape of the road ahead, but something was off. His instincts were screaming at him. "Stay on guard," Jack said, his voice low but urgent. "Something's not right." Just as the words left his mouth, a sudden noise rang out from behind them. The sound of engines revving, closing in fast. Jack's heart sank. "They're here," he muttered under his breath. Without a second thought, he signaled for the group to pull off the road. "Head for the trees," Jack shouted, his voice commanding. The bikers quickly veered off the road, taking refuge under the dense cover of the trees. The rain continued to pour down in sheets, and the sound of the storm seemed to drown out everything else. But Jack's focus was sharp, his ears straining to hear anything that might give away their position. The engines behind them grew louder, the group of pursuers drawing closer. Jack could see their headlights in the distance, cutting through the storm like a beacon. "We need to move," Jack said, his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. "Now." The bikers revved their engines and took off again, racing through the trees, trying to outrun their pursuers. Jack glanced back to make sure Mia was still holding on. She was, her small arms tightly wrapped around him, but Jack could feel her fear. He wished there was more he could do, but he had to keep going. They had no choice. The road ahead was treacherous, and the storm was making it harder to see, but Jack kept pushing forward. The trees around them blurred as they sped through the forest, the sound of the engines and the rain the only things that could be heard. Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened as he focused on the path ahead. Every turn, every twist in the road felt like it could be their last. He knew they had to get to Marcus. He had to believe that they could make it. The sound of the engines behind them grew louder, and Jack could see the headlights getting closer. They weren't far off now. Jack cursed under his breath. "Come on," he muttered, pushing the throttle harder. He could feel the bike responding, speeding up, but it wasn't enough. The group behind them was gaining ground. "We need to lose them," Jack said. "Head toward the cliffs. There's a drop. We can't let them catch us." The bikers followed his lead, racing toward the cliffside. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest as he pushed his bike faster, the others close behind. The drop came into view, the dark abyss of the cliffside looming in the distance. Jack didn't hesitate. He veered toward it, hoping the others would follow. The sound of the engines grew even louder behind them. They had to make it. They had to outrun them. They couldn't get caught now. The roar of the engines behind them was deafening, a constant reminder of the threat closing in. Jack pushed his bike harder, the tires screeching against the slick dirt road as they raced toward the cliff. The rain continued to pour down in sheets, but the urgency in the air pushed him forward. He glanced over his shoulder, the headlights of the pursuing bikes getting closer with every passing second. His heart raced as the edge of the cliff came into view, the drops seemingly endless. "Hold on tight," Jack shouted to Mia, who was clinging to him, her small arms wrapped tightly around his waist. She pressed her face against his back, the fear palpable. Jack's grip tightened on the handlebars as he veered the bike toward the edge. The other bikers followed, staying close, but Jack knew they couldn't afford to slow down. The cliffside was the only option they had. It was a dangerous gamble, but they had no other choice. As they approached the edge, Jack felt the surge of adrenaline push him to the limit. He could hear the other bikers gaining on them, the sound of their engines getting louder. He had to act now. With a quick twist of the throttle, Jack sent his bike into a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding the sharp drop to the side. He could feel the tension in his muscles as he fought to keep control, the bike sliding slightly as he made the turn. Mia gasped behind him, but Jack didn't look back. He focused entirely on the path ahead, his heart pounding. The others were right behind them now, but Jack wasn't going to let them get any closer. The cliffside stretched out in front of them, a jagged drop to the forest below. The bikes ahead were too close, but Jack wasn't backing down. With a deep breath, he made his move, racing toward the narrow gap between the cliffs. The engines roared as the bikers followed, but Jack pushed forward with everything he had. The gap was closing fast, but they had no other option. As they neared it, Jack pushed the throttle to its limit, sending his bike flying through the gap with inches to spare. The others followed, and for a brief moment, it seemed like they might make it. But just as Jack cleared the gap, He heard a deafening crash behind him. He didn't look back, but the sound of engines colliding with the rocky ground was unmistakable. His heart sank, but there was no time to dwell on it. They had to keep moving. Jack pushed his bike forward, his eyes scanning the trail ahead. The rain was coming down. Harder now, the road slick and treacherous, but they couldn't stop. Behind them, the sound of motorcycles hitting the ground was fading, but Jack knew they wouldn't be the only ones chasing them. He had to get to Marcus. It was their only chance. Mia's grip tightened as Jack swerved to avoid a large rock in the road, the tires skidding for a moment. He could feel her fear, but he couldn't slow down. "We're almost there," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Mia didn't answer, but Jack could feel her holding on tighter, her body pressed against his. They were in this together, and Jack wasn't about to let anything happen to her. The road ahead was winding, but Jack didn't slow down. The storm had picked up again, and the visibility was poor, but he kept his focus. The sound of the rain hitting the ground, the roar of the engines, and the occasional crack of thunder filled the air, creating an almost suffocating sense of urgency. As they reached the next curve in the road, Jack could see the silhouette of a building in the distance, Marcus Place. It was still a few miles away, but it felt like a lifetime. The sound of the storm was deafening now, and the rain was coming down so hard that it was difficult to see anything beyond the glow of the headlights. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he pushed through the storm, knowing that every second counted. Mia's grip was still firm, but Jack could feel her body trembling. He knew it was hard for her, but they were so close. The buildings ahead grew clearer, and Jack knew they had made it. Marcus Place was just up ahead, and they were almost there. But just as they were about to pull into the driveway, Jack's heart dropped. From the corner of his eye, he saw headlights approaching fast, more bikes, closing in on them. Jack cursed under his breath. They weren't safe yet. He could feel the weight of the situation closing in. "Stay with me," Jack said, his voice tight with urgency. Mia squeezed her arms around him as the headlights behind them grew brighter. Jack revved his engine, pushing it to the limit, racing toward Marcus Place. They had to get inside. As they skidded to a stop in front of the building, Jack swung his leg over the bike and turned to Mia. "Get inside," he said. "Now." Mia didn't hesitate. She jumped off the bike and ran toward the door as Jack turned to face the approaching bikes. The others were dismounting quickly, and Jack could hear the sound of engines screeching to a halt behind him. The danger wasn't over. Not yet. The door to Marcus Place slammed shut behind them, the heavy wood reverberating in the air as Mia, Jack, and the others quickly found shelter inside. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, but they were finally out of immediate danger, at least for now. Jack's heart was still racing, the adrenaline from the close call on the road still fresh in his veins. He didn't let his guard down, though. He knew they had just bought themselves some time, but time was a luxury they didn't have. The room they entered was dimly lit, with only a single lamp flickering in the corner. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Jack motioned for Mia to stay near him, his eyes scanning the surroundings as the rest of the crew quickly closed the door and locked it behind them. The sound of rain hitting the roof was almost deafening, but the silence inside the cabin was thick with the weight of what had just happened. "We're safe for now," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "But don't relax just yet. We've got work to do." Tommy, who had been one of the first to dismount, spoke up. "We'll need to make contact with Marcus as soon as possible. The sooner we know where he is, the better." Jack nodded, his gaze still on Mia. She was sitting on a worn-out couch near the wall, looking small and fragile in the dim light. She hadn't said a word since they'd arrived, but Jack could see the exhaustion in her eyes. It was clear that the past few days had taken everything from her. "Mia," Jack said gently, walking over to her. "We're here to help you. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Mia looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. "What if they come for me again?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. Jack knelt down in front of her, his heart aching for the little girl who had already been through too much. "They won't get to you," he said softly but with conviction. "Not while I'm here." Mia nodded slowly, but Jack could see the doubt still clouding her face. He didn't blame her. Trust was hard when it had been shattered so many times before. Jack stood up and turned to the rest of the group. "We need to lay low for a bit," he said. "Keep your eyes and ears open. If anyone comes looking, we'll be ready." The others nodded in agreement, and they quickly began setting up for the night. The storm outside was still fierce, and Jack knew they couldn't afford to go anywhere until they were sure it was safe. Hours passed, and the tension in the cabin never let up. Jack kept watch near the window, his eyes scanning the dark, rainy landscape outside. He knew that anyone who was looking for them wouldn't stop until they found them, but they had to be smart. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Mia had fallen asleep on the couch, her small body curled up in a blanket. She looked so innocent, so fragile, and Jack's heart ached for her. He had promised to keep her safe, and he wouldn't break that promise, not for anything. As the storm raged on, Jack's mind raced through the next steps. They had to get to Marcus, but there was no guarantee that Marcus could help them the way they needed. What if Marcus had been compromised? What if they were walking into another trap? Jack pushed those thoughts aside. They didn't have time to second-guess themselves. They had come this far, and they had to keep moving forward. The rain had slowed to a drizzle when the sound of a knock echoed through the cabin. Jack's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately motioned for everyone to be quiet. He didn't move toward the door right away. Instead, he slowly reached for the handle of his weapon, ensuring the room was secure. Another knock came, followed by a voice from outside. "It's Marcus," the voice said, its tone low but unmistakable. Jack's eyes met the others, his face hardening. He moved quickly to the door, signaling for the crew to be ready. "Stay back," he ordered as he cracked the door open, just enough to see the figure standing. Outside, Marcus stood in the rain, his tall frame silhouetted against the stormy night. His face was familiar, but his eyes were guarded. "You're late," Jack said, keeping his voice steady. "The storm delayed us," Marcus replied, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Let me in, and I'll explain everything." Jack hesitated for a moment, but then stepped aside, allowing Marcus to enter. As Marcus crossed the threshold, Jack felt a slight sense of relief. He had to believe that Marcus was the answer to getting Mia to safety. "What's going on?" Jack asked, his voice sharp. "You're in deeper than you know," Marcus said, his eyes darting around the room before settling on Mia. "But first, we need to move fast. There are people looking for you, Jack, and they won't stop until they find you all." Jack's grip tightened on the door frame as Marcus stepped deeper into the room. "Who's after us?" Jack asked. Marcus looked at him, his face grim. "The people who have been chasing Mia, they've got a lot more power than you think. And they won't let you off the hook just because you've been hiding out here. We've got to move quickly, or it's all over." Jack felt the weight of Marcus's words settle heavily in his chest. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had come this far, but the real fight was just beginning. The room fell into an eerie silence as Marcus's words sank in. The weight of his statement hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. Jack's mind raced, trying to process what Marcus was telling them. The people after Mia weren't just some local thugs. They were powerful, organized, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Jack glanced at the rest of the crew. They all had the same look in their eyes, the quiet realization that this fight wasn't going to be easy. Mia was sitting off to the side, still curled up in a blanket, her eyes wide and searching, but she didn't say anything. Jack could see the fear still in her, the weight of everything she had been through. "So what now?" Jack asked, his voice steady but urgent. Marcus moved further into the room, pulling his jacket tighter around him as he leaned against the wall. He looked over at Jack, then at the rest of the crew, his face serious. "Now we move. There's no time to waste." "Move where?" Tommy asked, his brow furrowing. "We need to get Mia out of here. And we need to find a safe place, somewhere they can't track us," Marcus replied, his eyes narrowing. "I have a safe house. It's off the grid. It's the only place I know where they won't be able to find you." Jack didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." Marcus gave a quick nod, then looked at the rest of the crew. "We've got to keep a low profile. No noise, no tracks, no leaving a trail. The moment we slip up, they'll find us." "Understood." The bikers nodded, their expressions grim. Jack glanced over at Mia, still sitting by the fire. "You ready?" he asked her, his voice softer this time. Mia nodded, her face pale but determined. Jack could see that she was doing her best to hold it together, but he knew it was hard. "We'll get through this," he promised. "You're not alone anymore." The group began to move quickly, gathering their things and preparing to leave. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the storm had left the ground slick and treacherous. They had to be careful. Every step counted. Jack stayed close to Mia, keeping an eye on her as they moved through the cabin. The rest of the crew was already outside, getting the bikes ready. Marcus led the way, his movements quick and precise. Jack followed closely behind, his mind still racing with the knowledge that they were far from safe. The woods surrounding the cabin were dense, the trees casting long shadows in the fading light. It was the perfect cover, but it also made it difficult to see what was lurking in the distance. Jack's grip tightened on his bike as he glanced over at Marcus. "How far?" he asked. "A few miles," Marcus said, his voice calm. "It's not far, but we have to get there without being seen." Jack nodded. He was starting to feel the weight of the situation. The pressure of knowing that Mia's safety was still in the balance. They couldn't afford to make mistakes. As they rode, the sound of the engines was muted by the thick forest around them. The drizzle had turned into a light mist, adding to the sense of unease that hung in the air. Jack kept his focus on the road, his eyes scanning the trees, looking for any signs of movement. Mia was holding on tight behind him, her small arms wrapped around his waist. Jack could feel her fear, but he didn't show it. He couldn't. He had to stay strong for her. They rode in silence, the steady hum of the engines the only sound in the otherwise quiet forest. Every turn, every bend in the road felt like they were being watched. It was hard to shake the feeling that someone was following them, but Jack couldn't take the risk of stopping to check. They had to keep moving. As they neared the edge of the woods, Jack saw the outline of a building in the distance. Marcus was right, it wasn't far. The safe house was within reach. The group picked up speed, eager to reach the safety of the house. But just as they were about to break through the tree line, the unmistakable sound of engines revving echoed behind them. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he glanced over his shoulder. The headlights were too close, too familiar. The chase wasn't over. "They're here," Jack said, his voice low and tense. "Get ready." He didn't have to say more. The bikers instinctively spread out, maneuvering their bikes to block the road ahead. They couldn't outrun them anymore. They'd have to fight. Jack's mind raced. He couldn't let them catch Mia. He had to protect her at all costs. "We make a stand here," he said, his voice steady despite the panic creeping in. "Hold them off until we get to the house." The other bikers nodded, their expressions hardening. They were in this together. The sound of engines roared behind them, the other group of bikers closing in. Jack's heart was pounding as he revved his engine, ready to take on whatever was coming. The time for running was over. Now, they would fight for Mia's future. The first bike pulled up alongside Jack, the rider looking at him with a sinister grin. Jack didn't hesitate. He swerved toward the bike, forcing it to veer off course. The other bikers followed suit, creating a wall of steel between the pursuing riders and the safe house. The battle had begun. The air was thick with the sound of engines, the screech of tires on wet ground, and the shouts of riders as they tried to gain the upper hand. Jack's focus was clear: get Mia to safety. The rest could wait. He kept moving forward, his heart pounding as he fought off the attackers, determined to win the fight and save Mia once and for all. The fight was fierce, the air thick with the screeching of tires, the roar of engines, and the clattering of metal on metal. Jack's heart pounded as he maneuvered his bike to block the incoming attackers, keeping his focus sharp, his mind entirely on protecting Mia. The other bikers, knowing what was at stake, were fighting with everything they had. The attackers were relentless, trying to force their way through, but Jack wasn't about to let them. His focus was unwavering. "Keep them back," he shouted to the others, his voice hoarse from the effort. The sound of their engines drowned out everything else. The storm had intensified, the rain pouring down in sheets, but it didn't matter. Jack's grip on his handlebars tightened as he sped toward the oncoming group, narrowly avoiding a collision as he swerved around one of their bikes. The others followed suit, creating a wall of steel to slow them down. The attackers didn't give up easily, though. Jack could see one of their riders trying to break through, but he was blocked by Tommy, who swerved his bike to take the brunt of the impact. The sound of metal scraping against metal rang through the air as Tommy held his ground. Jack's eyes flashed to Mia, who was clinging to the back of his bike, her small hands gripping his jacket tightly. He couldn't let her down. He couldn't lose her. They were so close to safety. As the battle raged on, the bikers' resolve remained strong. Jack could see the attackers beginning to slow, their numbers dwindling. They had underestimated the Thunderwolves. They weren't going to let anyone take Mia. One of the attackers, the leader, rode ahead, trying to break through the blockade, but Jack was ready. With a sharp twist of the throttle, Jack veered toward him, forcing him off course and into the side of the trees. The leader's bike crashed to the ground, skidding to a stop, but Jack didn't stop to watch. He had to keep moving. The remaining attackers quickly turned and fled, their bikes disappearing into the forest as they realized they were outmatched. The sound of their engines faded into the distance, and the forest returned to silence, save for the sound of rain hitting the ground. Jack slowed his bike, his heart still pounding, but the danger was over for now. He turned to look at Mia, who had stayed perfectly still through the entire ordeal, her face pale but relieved. Jack pulled over to the side of the road and stopped, turning off the engine. The rest of the bikers followed suit, their bikes rolling to a stop around him. The battle was won, but the fight for Mia's future wasn't over yet. "You okay?" Jack asked, his voice soft but firm as he looked at Mia. She nodded slowly, her eyes still wide with shock. I'm okay," she whispered, her voice small. Jack gave her a reassuring smile, though his mind was still racing. "We're not done yet, Mia," he said, his tone gentle but serious. "But we're getting closer. We'll keep you safe." Mia looked up at him, her face full of gratitude, but Jack could see the lingering fear in her eyes. He knew it wasn't over. The people after her would stop at nothing to find her. But for now, they had won a small victory. The rest of the crew dismounted, gathering around Jack. Tommy was the first to speak. "We need to move. They'll be back." Jack nodded. "I know. We head for Marcus Place. Now." The group quickly prepared to leave, their eyes scanning the forest around them, but there was a sense of relief in the air. For now, they were safe. Jack gave Mia a final look, his expression serious. "Stay close," he told her. She nodded, her small hand gripping his jacket once more. They had come this far, but there was still a long road ahead. The crew mounted their bikes again, and with a roar of engines, they sped off into the night, heading for the safety of Marcus Place. As they rode, Jack couldn't help but glance back at the road they had just traveled. The danger had passed, but he knew it wasn't over. The fight for Mia's future was far from finished, but Jack wasn't afraid. They would get through this, together. The road stretched out before them, long and winding, but for the first time in days, Jack allowed himself to believe that they might just make it out alive. The storm had passed, and the road ahead was theirs to conquer. They would fight for Mia, and they wouldn't stop until she was safe. In this gripping tale of courage, survival, and loyalty, the Hell Angels stories come to life as a group of bikers fights to protect a young girl from powerful forces that won't stop until they get what they want. As the bikers ride through rain-soaked roads, battling dangerous enemies in a high-stakes pursuit, they forge an unbreakable bond, risking everything to safeguard the vulnerable. The Hell Angels stories draw you into the world of fierce loyalty, dangerous enemies, and unwavering resolve, showcasing the raw emotion and courage required to protect those you love. With every twist and turn, the bikers face impossible odds, navigating a storm of danger that threatens to tear them apart. Yet, their bond and determination remain unshaken as they fight to ensure Mia's safety against those who would do her harm. The Hell Angels stories are a testament to the strength of a chosen family, showing how even in the darkest moments, hope can light the way. Follow along as these bikers face overwhelming challenges, with their loyalty and courage shining through every chapter. Through each victory and loss, the Hell Angels stories will keep you on the edge of your seat, eagerly anticipating what comes next. As the bikers race toward a new future, the tale of Mia's survival and the unyielding determination of the Hell Angels unfolds, keeping you hooked until the very end.